Hello and good afternoon, good day. Hi, everyone. So, today we are talking about before you call it disengagement. And we're going to leave it there and we're just going to let that sit. We're going to talk more about that on today. So, what the whole reason why I decided that we should speak about this on today is just because there's just a lot going on, y'all. If I can be real, there's just a lot going on, and I think that not even I think, but this is something that is true to me, is that with so much going on in our world, we have to take the time to understand that we cannot separate our professional lives from our personal lives all the time, if at all. Like, we're not able to sever our memory, sever our emotions. And that doesn't give us an excuse to come in and just act on what we're feeling, but understanding that our personal lives and our professional lives, we are still who we are. I'm still Lapora, no matter where I go. And you are still who you are, no matter where you go. And because of this, I think that it's important to clarify, like when we're talking about value in the workplace, and when we're talking about how to or how actions and contributions are oftentimes misinterpreted or mistranslated. The other factor, which we haven't spoken about so far this year, the other factor is the extenuating circumstances, things that happen outside of our control, external situations, external scenarios that play into much of this. And that's what we're going to be focusing in on this week. And the primary reason for that is because as we're talking about workplace value and individuals giving everything that they have, when there are external factors that come into play, it does one primary thing, and that is that it affects what someone is potentially able to give. And we'll talk more about that. So, one of the reasons why I wanted to speak about this today as well is because, as many of you know, I am a military spouse, and so with all of the things that are currently happening, it affects me. It affects how I think about things. It affects how the things that I talk about, how I talk about those things. And I can't speak for all military spouses. I can't speak for all military families, but I can say this as being a truth for me and perhaps others. And that is that we are human. And in being human, we are going to operate in in that humanness and how we feel in that human aspect. Okay, so let's get into how this all ties into to workplace application, the workplace signal. So one of the things that we're seeing is that when with everything's going on, how people show up to work, they show up based off of how they feel it is they are supposed to show up, and they're also showing up trying to give their best. And world politics aside, when we think about if there are any family concerns, when we think about if there are friends or community impact, if we look at the overall news and the fear and anxiousness that brings a lot of people, or even the environment, right? There's so many different factors that even the financial or your financial state, there's so many different factors that can influence how you show up to work, how you bring your best, how you meet the organization standards, and how the organization sees that contribution as either being a value add or maybe something that is mistranslated altogether. And so it's seeping into all of these things are seeping into our work, whether we realize it or not. I actually had a coworker many decades ago, and actually there was at least two coworkers, a very similar situation. And this one coworker, she was just really rude, y'all. If I want to break it down, like she was just really rude. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. And a lot of the things that she did in the workplace and how she was trying to contribute and how she was trying to, create effort, many people miss that. Many people were like, "What in the world is she doing? Like, what is going on? Like, come on now, do better." Like that was the mindset. And the other thing that she did was that she was always going to sleep at work. Like whether it was going to sleep doing my presentation, doing somebody else's presentation, and we couldn't get it. And then the third thing, and there's a reason for why I'm sharing all of this. The third thing was being just extremely territorial about her stuff and her office and not wanting to move, not wanting anyone else in there, not none of that. And the reason why I share that, because we're talking about before we call it disengagement. Long story short, there's so many examples I could give. Long story short, come to find out she was living in her car. And because of that, it affected her 100%. And what I mean by that is, while she had that, or why the organization said, this is what 100% looks like, we're wanting you to do XYZ, all of that was clear. She was living in her car, not getting a good night's sleep. There were so many different other stressors, honestly, that just comes with that, right? Her 100% looked a little bit more like 50% to everyone else. But she saw it as giving 100 because her capacity was so very different than what other people would define it as. But as she was giving her, and this is all in hindsight as far as with the 100% and 50%, but as she was giving her all that she could potentially give, she was still getting the feedback that what she was doing wasn't enough. And so then what happens typically whenever the organization tells us, based off of, what it rewards or what it ignores, what is it telling us that is working? It was telling her that her actions, her efforts weren't being translated as valuable. And so now, instead of going from 100 to 50, she is now already at 50 because of all of those extenuating circumstances, and going down to about 25%. And we see that as being, that is a completely different scope between 150. But the reason why I bring this up is because as we're talking about the potential to mislabel what someone is doing, also bringing in that additional layer of, hey, what else is happening outside of work? And am I saying that we got to be, asking 100 questions and all in someone's personal lives? No, absolutely not. This isn't about that. And honestly, that is not even something that we can keep up with, whether it is from a leadership perspective or whether it is from a yourself or working with a coworker. We can't keep up with that. But there are some things that we can work on, because as we look at this through a systems lens, and when I say systems lens, what this is referring to is, how can we look at this as a whole, where we're not just blaming the leader, we're not just blaming the employee that is dealing with the challenges, we're not just blaming coworkers, but we're looking at what are the different touch points that isn't just quantifiable, but they are really, really important for figuring out how can we make this better, where when people are contributing, when they are putting forth an effort, it can be noticed, even when their 100 is actually coming across as 50%. But that's their 100 because that's what they can give for the time being. So, two things. One is that from a leadership perspective, it's looking at asking that question of what evidence. So, if I know that someone is potentially dealing with something outside of work, what evidence is supporting that? Without that, we'll find ourselves in a potential confirmation bias of supporting that. And with that confirmation bias, we can look at things like drift performance. We can look at things like rules. And for rules, we're talking about the incentives, we're talking about the punishments, we're talking about the constraints. What is the organization saying? What is currently in place, whether the rules or whether the performance that is maybe communicating to the employee that, hey, what you're doing now isn't enough? Or is it communicating that it is enough for the time being? And one thing that I've seen work really well is a drift performance where we're not just looking at performance reviews typically tend to build on top of each other, where if there has been negative past performance reviews, then the following one will be a negative, or it will build on based off of the negative performance. From there, you've grown from this point. But what if those were completed in absolutes, which I know is difficult when it comes to being able to essentially silo those. But what if they were completed in absolutes from the moment that last performance review is completed, putting that one to the side and now starting fresh? So that's that from that leadership perspective. And then from the coworker perspective, also looking at the self-awareness, or if you're the person that is having this challenge, the self-awareness. Am I showing up the same way that I show up when I'm at my baseline, or when I'm having a really good day? Or am I showing up differently? Do I feel like I have to show up at this level every single day in order to get rewarded, in order for my coworkers and my leaders to see that what I am doing is useful, that what I am doing is valuable? And that's not something that is necessarily going to provide a direct or immediate answer, but it is something worth exploring, worth looking further into, because it all boils down to, when we are misinterpreting what that contribution and that effort is, when we are mislabeling what the effort, the actions that people are taking, and we call it, well, that's slow performance or that's disengagement. What signal, what sign, what message are we sending? What message is the organization sending? So I know this one was a little different today, but as I said, it was just with so much going on in current events. I think that it's important to understand that there are so many different factors that can affect how someone shows up. And it doesn't have to be the current events, it could be something completely unrelated to that. But keeping that in mind, regardless of where you are in the organization, keeping that in mind as we work with others, as we work with leaders, as leaders work with direct reports, middle managers, entry level, doesn't matter. If we keep that in mind, that is going to be something that is going to help us to create more opportunities for each individual to see just how valuable they are and how valuable they can be. All right, y'all. That is all that I have for you today. I don't see any comments here, but as always, if you have comments, if you have questions, feel free to message me. Feel free to ask those questions on the post. And I'm happy to keep the conversation going, because this is definitely a conversation that is worth having, worth continuing. And no, we can't cover everything in 15, 20 minutes a week, but we can certainly cover more throughout conversations throughout the week. And in the next couple of weeks, I will have a guest that will be joining me. So I'm really excited about that. I love when we have guests. So be looking out for that. And that's all that I have for y'all for now. And please remember to stay adding value. All right, y'all. Bye.